Hi friends, Drew here with another episode of Drew's Cues. Today we're going to talk about rhythm, something I think we all could use a little more of. Let's dive in. Let's pick up where we left off with the video about lines and spaces. If you haven't seen it, you can check it out right here. We left off with the grand staff, which has two staves of 5 lines each, with the treble clef on the top staff, the bass clef on the bottom staff, and the middle C right in between them. This provides us with a visual way to know which notes to play. But the question that we left off with was this. Now we know how to read and write the notes up and down, but how do we know how long they are, or how fast to play them? Okay, how long or fast? Let's go back to our graph paper. Last time we used only the horizontal lines to create our staves. This time, let's also add in some vertical lines for now. I've taken a sheet of graph paper and drawn on some lines and some symbols that you will recognize. This is our grand staff with treble clef and bass clef. The staff then kinda goes off, and we can imagine it continuously going on and on forever and ever, until we decide to put in a final bar line that says, "This is the end!" But again, if we just drop some notes on this graph paper, how do we know when they're supposed to be played and how long they're supposed to be? Much like a ruler measures distance, let's have this horizontal space on the graph, these vertical lines, measure time. For the sake of argument, let's take this system and break it up into 2 equal parts. And we'll call each part a measure because these divisions help us to more easily measure the distances within them. And for now, we're going to just arbitrarily say that each measure is exactly 2 seconds in length, which means that each of these units in our graph is 1/8 of a second, or 0.125 seconds long. Okay. Great, so now we have a graph that shows us time, and we can drop notes on that timeline to know when to play them. But this still doesn't show us how long to play them. Well, maybe we could just stretch the notes out as long as they're supposed to be, like this? Yeah, that's not pretty at all. So, what else can we do? What if we define the duration of the notes based on what they look like and change the look of the note to make different durations? Let's start with the note that we've already been using. This one has a hole in it and it looks complete. Let's call it a whole note. And let's make it take up the whole measure. We'll put it at the beginning of the measure, but instead of spreading it out across the whole thing, we can just put it here, because we know this symbol takes up the whole measure. All right, we need something shorter. Let's go with 1/2 of a whole. So I guess we'll call it a half note. What should that look like? We could draw a slash through the whole note as if we were cutting it in half. But what if we instead took that slash and made it a stem on the side of the note? We can put one of them at the beginning, the same way we did with the whole note, but then put another one 8 units later, exactly halfway through the measure. Since a whole note lasts the whole measure, 16 units, or 2 seconds, we know that each half note lasts 8 units, or 1 second. Great! This is kind of fun. So for today, let's do this 2 more times. The next one should be 1/2 of a half, or a quarter. So Let's call it a quarter note. We can't really add another stem. That would start to get a little bit messy. So, what can we do? Whole notes have that hole in the middle, and half notes have the same thing. So why don't we just get rid of that and fill it in? Like this. And now we can add these to our graph with 4 units each. Awesome! So now we have 3 different options: whole notes, half notes, and quarter notes. Using the measures that we set up and the time that we talked about earlier, the whole notes will each last 2 seconds, the half notes will each last 1 second, and the quarter notes will each last half of a second. The actual length or duration of each note will vary depending on the tempo of the piece, or at that time of the piece, which is a discussion for another day. But the relationships between the notes always remains the same. Let's do one more, and if we continue with that idea of going by halves, then the next logical value will be an eighth note. But I'm running out of ideas on how to make them recognizably different. What can we do? I know, I think flags are cool, so we can just add a flag onto the stem of a quarter note, like this. And hey, since we have this flag thing on the eighth note, we can just stretch it across 2 of them to connect them together and show that they really are 2 equal parts of a quarter note. Why is there so much math in music? So here's one of the cool things about using these symbols to represent units of time instead of using a graph. We can now completely remove the vertical lines of the graph paper and still understand exactly what we're looking at. More than that, we can also squish the measures or stretch the measures, and it doesn't change that each measure, in our current tempo, remains exactly 2 seconds in duration. And so it also doesn't change how long or short the notes are in each of those measures. As long as the tempo stays the same, all whole notes will be the same length, all half notes will be the same length, all quarter notes will be the same length, and so on. And what's even more, within a single piece of music, the measures can be squished or stretched to different physical lengths. Again, because with the symbols showing us how long or short a note is, we are not in any way tied to a grid. If a measure only has a whole note in it, we can squish that measure down to make room for other measures. But if a measure has 8 eighth notes in it, we can stretch that out to make it a lot easier to read all of those notes. And there we have it. There are other types and lengths of notes that we'll talk about at another time. And we also need to talk about tempos. Oh, and time signatures. Basically, most of what I just told you can be changed. But the basic stuff remains the same. Note length is determined by the symbol, and the symbols' relationships to each other never change. A whole note is always twice the length of a half note, and a half note is always twice the length of a quarter note, and so on. How do you think about rhythms and note durations? Did starting off with this grid concept make sense to you? Let me know in the comments below how you learned to read rhythms and figured out how to make sense of it all. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's content. If you did and want more of it, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so that you get notifications and don't miss anything. Please leave a comment to let me know what you thought. And you can also go and check out my Instagram or Facebook pages at Drew Wheaton Music for more updates. Thanks, I'll see you next time.